He had his suitcase by the door, tickets ready, his heart racing with the thrill of finally seeing Europe when his phone buzzed with a message that sliced him open. His own son had written, cold as ice, "You're not coming. My wife says this trip is family only." Yet he was the one who paid for the flights, mapped the tours, bought the camera. In a single line, he was erased, betrayed, discarded like nothing. Imagine planning a dream and being told you don't belong. Would you stay silent or strike back? Keep watching, because what he did next will leave you speechless. The suitcase sat by the door. Its latches clicked shut with the kind of finality that didn't need words. Inside were shirts carefully folded, travel guides marked with yellow notes, and a brand new camera still waiting to capture the streets of Paris. Now every single item felt hollow, stripped of meaning. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the neat order he had built in that suitcase, realizing it mirrored the order he had always tried to keep in his family. Everything carefully prepared, carefully planned, always for someone else's happiness. But just like that, with a single text message, his part in the story was cut away. The suitcase wasn't a promise anymore. It was a monument to humiliation. He walked through his house in silence, the air carrying the weight of absence. On the dresser, small travel-sized bottles of shampoo and toothpaste sat in a neat row, lined up for the trip that would never come. The printed itineraries, stacked with precision, now mocked him from the table. Restaurants circled in red ink, museums noted with arrows, walking tours mapped out to the last detail. He had built this experience, carved it out with time and money and love, and yet the foundation had crumbled under a single phrase, family only. He lowered himself into the armchair in the living room, the one with the sagging cushion he kept meaning to replace, and stared at the stack of glossy brochures. Rome, Barcelona, Paris. Pages full of bright skies and couples laughing over glasses of wine. His hand moved almost without thought, lifting one brochure only to set it back down. His fingers lingered on the smooth paper, the images of places he had dreamed of seeing for decades, all of it stolen with a sentence typed in haste on a phone. He wondered if his son had even thought twice before sending it, if there had been any hesitation at all. Outside, the neighborhood carried on as if nothing had happened. A dog barked down the street. A child called out for his mother, and the hum of lawnmowers buzzed faintly in the background. Ordinary sounds. Normal life. Yet inside, it felt as if the air had turned against him, every noise echoing in the emptiness of his home. He glanced at the packed suitcase again, sitting there like a stranger at the door, waiting to leave, waiting to serve a purpose it would never serve. Evening came slowly, shadows stretching across the room until the glow of the television filled the silence. He let the news play, though he wasn't listening. His eyes kept shifting back to the suitcase, to the closed door, to the phone that hadn't buzzed again since the message that split him open. He picked up the device once or twice, his thumb hovering as though he might call, might demand an explanation. But what words could undo that kind of rejection? He set it back down, his hand shaking slightly as it hit the table. Later, restless and searching for something to fill the void, he opened his laptop. He clicked aimlessly through social media, letting the feed roll by like water he couldn't stop. A neighbor's cat photos, political arguments he had no energy for, a recipe shared by a friend. Then his heart stopped. A picture. His son standing with his wife and her parents beneath the Eiffel Tower, their smiles bright, their glasses raised. The caption read, "Beginning of the best family vacation ever." The word family glowed on the screen like a wound torn open. He leaned closer, breath caught in his chest, scrolling with a trembling hand. More photos appeared, each one sharper than a knife. The four of them at a cafe table, wine glasses clinking. His son's wife with her parents on the steps of the Louvre, his son laughing, head thrown back in carefree joy. 4 people, 4 smiles, his family. except for him, the man who had built the trip, funded the flights, planned every detail, erased without hesitation. He set the laptop down, his hands pressing into his knees as he stood and moved toward the kitchen window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, hollow-eyed and lined with disbelief. Behind that reflection, the laptop screen still glowed with their happiness. Two images layered together, the ghost of the father and the reality of the family who had left him behind. The contrast was unbearable. He pressed his palm against the cold glass as if he might push through, as if he might force his way into the picture where he belonged. But the glass stayed firm. His reflection stayed ghostly, and the laughter on the screen remained unreachable. Night dragged on. He lay in bed, tossing from side to side, the images replaying behind closed eyelids. The suitcase still sat by the door, a silent accusation. The camera still waited in its box, brand new and unused. Every sound in the house seemed louder now, the tick of the clock unbearable, the creak of the floor reminding him of a presence that wasn't there. His mind replayed the text, the words etched in his memory, family only. He wondered how many times they had discussed it before hitting send. Was it decided casually, like choosing a restaurant? Or had they planned it? His erasure deliberate, cold, rehearsed. By morning, gray light filtered through the curtains, casting everything in pale shadows. He sat at the kitchen table, a coffee mug shaking slightly in his hand. The bitterness of the drink coated his tongue, but it did nothing to steady him. He rehearsed sentences in his head, things he might say to his son, ways to demand the truth. The silence in the room pushed him to dial, his fingers trembling as the international ringtone buzzed in his ear. His son answered, cheerful, distracted, background noise of bustling streets and foreign laughter filling the line. Hi, Dad. The voice that had once carried warmth now felt sharp. He asked his question directly. No pleasantries, no hesitation. I saw the photos. Why am I not there? The pause that followed was heavy, like a stone sinking into water. Then the words came, colder than the text had been. You're too much, too needy. We didn't want the trip ruined. The mug slipped in his hand, nearly spilling coffee across the table. Ruined. That was the word his son had chosen. The man who had raised him, who had paid for the wedding, who had co-signed the mortgage, who had built the very life they were living. Too needy. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, every inhale sharp, every exhale heavier. The call ended not with comfort, not with apology, but with dismissal. The phone lay on the table, its dark screen staring back at him like a verdict. He rose from the chair and walked into his study. The walls lined with family photos, moments frozen in frames, him teaching his son to ride a bike, holding him at graduation, walking him down the aisle with pride. Each picture told a story. Each story now felt poisoned. He traced the glass of one frame with his finger, his reflection mingling with the smiling faces of the past. His jaw tightened. What had once been love now looked like evidence of years spent giving, sacrificing, and being repaid with erasure. He turned away from the photos, his gaze falling back to the suitcase in the hall. Still there, still packed, still meaningless. The sight of it filled him with something new. Not sadness this time, but a growing edge of clarity. The suitcase was not a symbol of what he had lost. It was a reminder of what had been taken, and in that reminder, a seed of decision began to form, sharp and undeniable. He closed the bedroom door with deliberate care, the suitcase waiting silently behind it. His next step was already taking shape in his mind, a step that would make sure no one forgot the cost of betrayal. And what he was about to do would turn their perfect vacation into a memory they would never escape. He scrolled without thinking, the soft blue glow of the screen washing over his face in the dim light of the living room. His thumb moved in restless jerks, searching for distraction, anything to quiet the weight pressing against his chest. Neighbors' cats in funny poses, recipe swaps, political rants he barely skimmed. Then the image appeared and the breath stopped in his throat. His son and daughter-in-law, grinning beneath the iron lattice of the Eiffel Tower. The parents-in-law standing beside them with the smug air of tourists who believed they belonged there more than anyone else. 4 people smiling, glasses raised to the camera, the caption written in a bright, careless tone, beginning of the best family vacation ever. The word family seemed to leap off the screen, carving into him with deliberate cruelty. His hand trembled, the phone slipping slightly in his palm. He blinked once, then again, hoping it was an old memory, a post dug out of the past, some mistake in timing. But the timestamp mocked him, just hours ago. They were there now, in the city he had dreamed of, in the place he had meticulously planned to visit, using the flights he had purchased, the itinerary he had mapped out, the money he had saved from his own pocket. And he had been cut out of the picture like an error in editing. His thumb moved again, faster this time, pressing into the glass as if he could scrape away the smiling faces. More photos appeared, each one sharper than the last. His son's wife leaning against her father outside the Louvre, her mother holding a glass of wine, all of them gathered at a Parisian cafe. And there in the center, his son, laughing with his head thrown back, his shoulders relaxed, his joy so full it looked rehearsed. 4 people, together, not 5, never 5. He was absent, deliberately erased, the empty space between them filled with laughter that did not need him. The blood roared in his ears as he set the phone down on the coffee table, but the screen continued to glow with their happiness. He stood, moving toward the kitchen window, the reflection of his own face caught in the glass. Hollow eyes stared back at him, a man uninvited, a man discarded, and behind that reflection, faint but undeniable, was the glow of the photos still open on the phone, his lonely image layered over their joy. 2 worlds colliding in a single pane of glass. His shoulders sagged under the weight of it. He pressed his palm against the cool surface, as if he could push through, as if he could step into the picture where he belonged. But the glass resisted, and the reflection remained fractured. He turned back toward the living room, unable to resist the pull of the phone again. Sitting down, he lifted it with hands that felt heavier than they had a moment ago. More photos, always more. His son lifting a wine glass in a toast, the daughter-in-law's parents raising theirs in return. The caption underneath stabbed at him with a casual cruelty. So grateful for family time in the city of light. His lips curled in a bitter smile that wasn't a smile at all. Gratitude, family, 2 words weaponized against him. 2 words that turned everything he had given into proof that he was unnecessary. His chest burned, anger rising like fire in his lungs. He had been the one to sacrifice. He had been the one to fund their dreams. He had said no to his own life so they could say yes to theirs. Every dollar, every plan, every trip postponed, every choice adjusted for their comfort. And now here they were, living the reward of his sacrifices, while he sat alone in a darkened room with nothing but the glow of their joy to keep him company. The phone buzzed in his hand with another update, another smiling face beneath the Parisian sky. He swiped it away with a violent flick, his breathing sharp and ragged. He wanted to hurl the device across the room, to hear it shatter against the wall, to destroy the evidence of their betrayal. But he didn't. Instead, he placed it gently on the table, his hand lingering above it, fingers twitching like they ached to close into a fist. He rose to his feet again, pacing across the carpet in uneven strides. The house around him seemed louder now. Every creak of the floor, every hum of the refrigerator, every tick of the clock filling the silence that their absence had left behind. He clenched his jaw until it ached, staring once more at the packed suitcase by the door. It had been a symbol of anticipation, of adventure, Now it stood as a monument to humiliation. Every item inside it mocked him: the shirts folded for dinners that would never happen, the maps marked with sights he would never see, the camera that would never capture a single stone of Parisian streets. He sank back into the chair, the phone glowing again. Another post, another reminder. The humiliation mixed with something sharper now, something darker, anger, steady and growing, no longer just a wound, but a weapon forming in the shadows. He could feel it in the set of his jaw, in the tightening of his fists, in the way his heartbeat no longer raced from shock but from resolve. They had drawn the line. They had made the choice. And in doing so, they had given him a clarity he had never known before. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, letting the anger settle into him like iron setting in stone. Betrayal had stripped him bare, but in that stripping came something else, something clean. He could see now what he had refused to see before, what he had buried under excuses and justifications. He had never been family in their eyes. He had been a bank account, a safety net, a convenience, and now that he had glimpsed the truth, he could not unsee it. The phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't look away. He picked it up, stared at the smiling faces once more, and let the image burn into his mind like evidence for a trial yet to come. Every glass of wine they drank on his money, every hotel bed they slept in with his credit, every photograph they posted using his sacrifices, they were all receipts. And one day soon, he would collect. He placed the phone down carefully, the screen finally dimming into black. His reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. A man transformed, no longer hollow but sharpened. He reached for the suitcase once more, resting his hand on the handle, not to carry it, not to leave, but to remind himself of what had been taken. And as his fingers curled around the leather grip, a thought formed, cold and certain, a thought that promised the story was only just beginning. The cruel reveal had broken him open, but inside the break was a spark, and that spark was already reaching for the fire. He sat at the kitchen table, his coffee turning cold in the mug as morning light crept across the counter. The phone was heavy in his hand, the screen glowing with an international number. He had rehearsed the words over and over all night, lying awake with the sound of their laughter echoing from photographs he couldn't escape. His thumb hovered, then pressed, and the line began to ring. Each tone sounded distant, expensive, a reminder of how far away they were, how unreachable. On the fourth ring, his son answered, cheerful, distracted, the noise of a European street humming in the background. Hi, Dad. The voice that once carried warmth now cut him with its casual brightness. He wasted no time. I saw the photos, he said, his tone stripped of pleasantries. The pause that followed told him everything. His son's voice shifted, colder, defensive. We can explain. You said it was family only. What am I then? For a moment there was nothing, just the muffled hum of traffic and the laughter of strangers across the ocean. Then came the words, blunt and heavy. You're too needy. You ruin everything. He sat very still, the words echoing in his head like the strike of a hammer. Too needy. Ruin everything. His hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. The line between them, once a lifeline of love, now felt like a wire pulled tight enough to snap. He looked at the coffee mug in front of him, the steam long gone, and thought how even that small gesture mirrored his own place in their lives. Something once warm, now discarded, forgotten, unnecessary. His son's wife's voice floated faintly in the background, sharp and confident, telling him to hurry, to look at something across the street. Then laughter, carefree and oblivious, the sound of people who believed they were free of him. He pressed the phone harder to his ear, as if closeness could change the words already spoken, but nothing shifted. The sentence remained lodged in him, unmovable. He thought of all the times he had said yes when it cost him, covering tuition, paying off debts, Co-signing a mortgage, postponing his own life for theirs. Each memory surfaced now like proof against the charge, evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. He wanted to shout it back through the phone, to make them hear the truth of what he had given. But his voice didn't rise. It sank. "I understand," he said quietly. His son answered quickly, with relief. "Good. We'll talk when we get back." And then the line went dead. The silence that followed was deeper than before. He lowered the phone to the table, placing it down with deliberate care, as though it might explode if he dropped it. His hands rested beside it, palms flat, fingers spread. His chest ached, not with rage yet, but with something heavier, something slower. The feeling of being discarded. The realization that what he had built had been taken for granted for so long that cutting him out now felt easy, natural, inevitable to them. He rose from the table and walked into his study, the place where his past lived in frames along the walls. Photographs stared back at him. His son on a bicycle, his son at graduation, his son on his wedding day. His hand traced one frame, the glass cool beneath his fingertips. He had stood behind all of these moments, steady, constant, the foundation on which everything had been built, and yet the foundation was dismissed as a flaw, a burden, too needy, too much. He looked at his own reflection in the glass, an older man, hollow-eyed, shoulders heavy, and for the first time he saw the outline of a truth he had avoided for years. He had not been loved for who he was. He had been valued only for what he could provide. His jaw tightened as he moved to the desk, pulling open drawers and scattering receipts and statements across the wood. Bank transfers, car payments, mortgage documents. Every sacrifice laid out like exhibits in a case that no one but him would ever review. He flipped through them with shaking hands, the numbers blurring as anger fought through the weight of sorrow. He had been useful. He had been generous. And now, he had been erased. The phone buzzed again, startling him, the same international code flashing across the screen. He hesitated, then answered, his voice steady this time. Before he could speak, his son's voice came sharp, demanding, "What did you do to the card?" "It was declined at lunch. Everyone was embarrassed." His lips parted in a bitter laugh. "That must have been uncomfortable," he said. His son's wife's voice cut through the line, shrill, furious. "Fix it. Restore it now." His son added the threat that chilled him in a way nothing else had. "If you don't, when we get back, we'll look into care facilities. You can't handle this anymore. We'll sell your house to cover it." The words settled like frost in his chest. Care facilities. Sell your house. The cruelty was breathtaking, delivered with the same casual tone they might use to order dessert. He stared at the deeds on his desk, his hands suddenly still. For years, he had given, and in return, they would lock him away and strip what was left. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply said, "I heard every word." Then, with calm precision, "No." The line erupted with protest, threats, demands. But he didn't stay to listen. He pressed end, set the phone face down on the desk, and leaned back in his chair. His reflection stared back from the dark screen. But it wasn't the same hollow-eyed man anymore. There was something colder there now, something sharpened. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the yard he had tended for decades. The grass was neat, the shrubs trimmed, the fence still sturdy. His house, his work, his name on the deed, the place they thought they could sell as if it were theirs. His chest rose with a slow breath, steady and controlled, the pain settling into something firmer, something stronger. They had called him needy. They had called him a ruin. But standing there, looking at his home, he realized the truth. He wasn't the one who had destroyed anything. He had built. He had sustained. And now, for the first time, he was ready to dismantle. He turned back to the desk, The deed spread before him like a battle plan. His hand rested on the paper of another house, not his own but the one he had bought for them. His son's house. His name still on the title. He straightened the papers, the lines of his mouth tightening into something close to a smile. The phone vibrated again, insistent on the desk. But he ignored it. His decision had already begun to take shape, clear and undeniable. The pain was still there, the sting of rejection still raw. But beneath it something new pulsed steady. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was resolve. He had been discarded. But now, he would show them what it meant to be remembered. The study was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed into his ears until it became its own sound. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, unwilling to step inside, because he knew what waited for him. The walls were lined with frames, decades of moments frozen in smiles, sunlight, and celebrations. Each photo had once been a reminder of love, of a life well lived. But now they looked like evidence in a case he hadn't realized he was building. He forced himself forward, his hand brushing the nearest frame, the glass cool against his fingertips. There he was, younger, bent over the handlebars of a small red bicycle, his son wobbling forward, a helmet too big slipping over his forehead. He remembered the shouts of encouragement, the rush of pride when those tiny wheels steadied, the sound of his boy laughing in victory. He had thought then that he was building more than balance, that he was building trust, building family. Now the image mocked him, a silent reminder that even in teaching freedom, he had planted the seed of distance. His gaze shifted to another frame, his son in cap and gown, the college emblem sharp against the black robe. He could still feel the weight of the check he had written, the one that cleared debts, erased the years of struggle his son would have faced. He had called it a gift, told himself it was love. But standing here now, he saw it differently. It hadn't been gratitude in his son's eyes that day. It had been expectation, the beginning of a pattern that would stretch far beyond tuition. He moved down the line, his jaw tightening with each step. The wedding photo stopped him. His son, proud and young, standing with the woman who had now become the gatekeeper of his exile. He remembered the day vividly, not for the joy, but for the number $30,000. That was what it had cost him to buy the perfect venue, the flowers, the band, the endless details his son's bride had demanded. He had told himself he was paying for happiness. Now he realized he had simply paid his way out of the picture. Her parents had dominated the photographs, their smiles wide, their presence commanding. And he thought he had signed every check was a shadow on the edge of the frame, on the desk. Scattered where he had left them the night before were statements, receipts, the record of a lifetime of yes, mortgage papers where his name stood as guarantor, the only reason the bank had agreed, car payments he had taken over when his son's job fell through, credit card bills he had covered when they couldn't manage. Each page he turned over cut deeper. These weren't just papers. They were shackles he had clasped on his own wrists, mistaking sacrifice for love, mistaking generosity for family. He sat heavily in the leather chair, its familiar creak almost accusatory. The photos above him seemed to lean forward, each one whispering a truth he didn't want to hear. He had thought he was building a legacy of care. Instead, he had built a system of dependency that turned him from father into provider, from parent into resource. His eyes burned, not with tears, but with clarity. Nostalgia, once sweet, was souring in his chest. The bike, the graduation, the wedding, all of it had been purchased with pieces of himself, and every piece had been taken, pocketed, forgotten. His hand closed around a frame on the desk, a smaller one, his favorite once. He lifted it slowly, staring at the picture inside, his son as a toddler, curled against his chest, both of them smiling into the camera, the kind of smile that had once felt effortless. He remembered the smell of baby shampoo, the warmth of that tiny body asleep against his shoulder. He remembered thinking then that nothing could ever break the bond between them. Now, as he looked into those captured eyes, he saw the lie he had lived under. That bond had not broken in a single moment. It had been eroded piece by piece, washed away by years of taking until nothing remained. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, and he almost didn't recognize the man he saw. Older, yes, but not just older. Hardened, his jaw set, his eyes colder than he remembered. There was no softness left in that face, no illusion. He set the frame back down, turning it so the photo faced the desk instead of him. One by one, he began to do the same with the others, flipping them over until the smiles were gone. The memories muted. The wall that had once held his story now stood in silence, its evidence hidden but not erased. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his hands clasped together so tightly the knuckles blanched. Regret pressed against him. But it wasn't regret for what he had done. It was regret for what he had allowed. He had mistaken his sacrifices for love, when in truth, they had been tools for manipulation. He had enabled his own erasure, brick by brick, check by check, until the foundation of who he was had been buried beneath the weight of their needs. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a reminder that time had not stopped just because he finally saw the truth. He let the sound steady him, each tick pulling him further from nostalgia, deeper into something else. Bitterness coiled in his chest, sharp and electric. It spread through him, burning away the last of the illusions he had clung to. This was not the story of a man who had been loved and lost. This was the story of a man who had been used, drained, and discarded. And the weight of that truth was no longer unbearable. It was fuel. He sat back in the chair, staring at the blank backs of the photos, at the papers spread across the desk. Every detail was clear now, every pattern undeniable. He had been blind, but not anymore. And with clarity came possibility. He tapped a finger against the deed of the house he had bought for his son. The ink of his name sharp and definitive. They had forgotten whose name mattered. They had forgotten where the power truly rested. He stood, crossing to the window, looking out at the yard beyond. The world outside was ordinary. Neighbors walking their dogs, cars rolling down the street, life moving as if nothing had shifted. But for him, everything had. He turned back to the study. The blank photos, the scattered receipts, the proof of a life twisted into something unrecognizable. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it weren't so cold. The pain was still there, but it no longer owned him. The bitterness had carved something new, something sharper, something unyielding. He had been blind, but now his eyes were open. He had been generous, but now he was finished. And as he closed the door to the study, leaving the silent faces turned away, he knew the time for regret had ended. What came next would not be sacrifice. It would not be generosity. It would be something else entirely, something they would never forget. The phone lit up on his desk, a soft vibration that cut through the stillness of the study. He nearly ignored it, thinking it was another meaningless notification, some email or automated reminder. But something in him, some restless pull, made him reach for it. He pressed his thumb against the screen, and what appeared was not an ad or a headline but a banking alert. Transaction processed. He opened the app, his heart hammering against his ribs as the numbers came into focus. The charge was fresh, stamped with the name of a restaurant in Paris, a place he didn't recognize but could imagine the clink of crystal glasses, candlelight bouncing off polished silverware, waiters bowing as they poured wine older than his son's marriage. The charge wasn't small. It was indulgent. His chest tightened as he scrolled further. Another alert, another transaction. This one at a boutique, the kind that sold handbags with price tags higher than his monthly pension. Then a hotel, the cost bold and unapologetic. His fingers swiped again and again, each movement revealing another wound. Meals, shops, tickets, all in Paris, all in their names, all with his money. His son's words rang in his ears. "You're too needy. You ruin everything," and yet here they were, living off his account, eating steak while he sat alone with cold coffee. His breathing sharpened, each inhale cutting like glass. He set the phone down, but only for a moment before snatching it up again, scrolling faster, needing to see it all, needing to let the outrage burn through him completely. There was no mistake, no misunderstanding. They had exiled him from the trip, erased him from the definition of family. But they hadn't hesitated to carry his wallet along. They had planned the betrayal so carefully that even his money was expected to make the journey he wasn't allowed to take. He rose from the chair so suddenly it rolled backward into the wall. Pacing across the carpet, phone clenched in his fist. He felt the fire of humiliation twist into something harder, something more dangerous. The photos on the wall were still face down, the study stripped of its illusions. And now the evidence was complete. He wasn't just unnecessary. He was a resource to be mined until empty. They had taken his trust, his sacrifices, his years, and now they had taken his money to buy wine in Paris while he sat in silence. He walked to the mirror above the desk, his reflection caught in the darkened glass. The man staring back at him was not broken. He was sharpening, every line of his face cut with new clarity. Outrage had begun its transformation. Resolve was forming in its place. He turned back to the desk, opened the laptop, and pulled up his account dashboard. There it was in clean digital letters. His name, his account, his control. He hovered over the section marked Authorized Users. And there it was again. His son's name, his daughter-in-law's name. A decision made years ago in the name of trust, convenience, family. That trust had been weaponized. His finger hovered over the trackpad, trembling with the weight of the moment. He wanted to click, to sever them instantly, to shut off their access like snapping a lock. But something in him held steady, a whisper that said not yet. Rage demanded impulse, but resolve required patience. He closed the laptop with a snap, the sound echoing through the room like a gavel striking wood. He stood still for a long moment, his hand pressed flat against the desk, his breath steadying. This wasn't about a single click. This was about more than cutting off a card. This was about rewriting the story they had forced him into. The phone buzzed again. Another transaction. Another charge for indulgence across the ocean. He didn't open it this time. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. He set the phone down on the desk. Face up, the glow fading until the screen went black. His reflection stared back at him from that dark surface, older, lined, yes, but no longer blurred by confusion. His eyes were sharp now, alive with something they hadn't carried in years. He walked out of the study and into the kitchen, his steps heavy, deliberate. The coffee maker gurgled to life under his hand, the sound filling the silence with something steady. He poured a cup, the steam curling upward in the dim light of morning, and sat down at the table once more. Outside, the lawnmower started up next door, the hum of ordinary life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He sipped the coffee, the bitterness grounding him, and let the truth settle fully into his bones. He was not needy. He was not a ruin. He was a man who had given too much for too long and had been paid back with betrayal. They thought they could take his money, take his trust, take his dignity, and leave him with nothing. But they were wrong. What they had taken was fuel, and fuel, when sparked, becomes fire. His eyes drifted back toward the study, where the deeds and papers waited like silent soldiers. His house, his accounts, his signature on every line that mattered. They had mistaken kindness for weakness, sacrifice for servitude. They had forgotten whose name truly carried weight. He set the mug down slowly, his hand steady now, no tremor left. The decision was not fully made. Not yet. But it was coming. The coffee cooled on the table as he sat in the growing light of morning, his thoughts sharpening into plans. Across the ocean, his son and daughter-in-law drank wine and laughed under Parisian skies. Oblivious. They thought they had erased him, thought he was powerless. But they were spending his money, living in a house with his name on the deed, walking a path he had paved. They thought he was finished. He almost smiled at the thought. The phone buzzed one last time, the alert glowing across the screen. Another purchase. He reached for it, not to stop it, not yet, but to let the glow burn into his vision. Every charge, every betrayal was another brick in the wall he was building inside himself. He set the phone down carefully, leaned back in his chair, and let the silence settle again. Outrage had done its work. Now came the next stage. What they didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that the man they had dismissed was no longer the man they thought they owned. The betrayal had sharpened him, stripped him of illusions, and left behind something they had never faced before. He would not simply stop them. He would make them remember. And when the moment came, they would understand the cost of crossing a man who had nothing left to lose. The study was dim, the only light coming from the glow of the laptop screen, its pale blue reflection cutting across his face. He sat perfectly still, his hands resting on either side of the keyboard, the cursor hovering like a trigger. His son's name glared back at him from the authorized users list, a digital brand he had allowed to exist for years. He remembered the night he'd added it, a quiet evening when he had convinced himself it was an act of love, a father helping his son establish independence. He had been proud then, foolishly proud, thinking trust could be measured in credit and sacrifice. Now the letters of that name looked like chains. His finger twitched above the trackpad, the weight of hesitation pressing down, then lifting. He clicked. The confirmation screen appeared, the words sharp and final. "Are you sure? This action cannot be undone." He read them once, then again, his heart pounding like a drum inside his chest. He moved the cursor, clicked yes, and watched the access vanish from the screen. Just like that, years of exploitation ended with one deliberate choice. He leaned back in the chair, the leather groaning beneath him, his chest rising with a breath that felt different from any he had taken in years. For the first time, the air didn't taste like regret. It tasted like freedom. His hands no longer trembled. He set them calmly on the desk, palms flat against the wood, and stared at the blank space where his son's name had been. The silence in the room deepened, but it wasn't the suffocating kind he had been living with. It was a silence that hummed with power, alive with the echo of defiance. A small smile ghosted across his lips, not of joy, but of recognition. This was who he had always been beneath the years of sacrifice and servitude, a man with control, a man with the will to act. The phone buzzed almost instantly, the vibration rattling against the wood, a desperate pulse from across the ocean. He didn't move to answer. He let it shake, let it scream for attention, till the sound stopped. Then it buzzed again, insistent, louder in the quiet room. He lifted it slowly this time, swiping to answer, pressing it to his ear with steady hands. His son's voice erupted immediately, sharp, panicked, angry. "What did you do?" The card was declined. At lunch. In front of everyone. He could hear his daughter-in-law in the background, shrill with fury, demanding, blaming. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, letting their outrage roll over him like waves against rock. "That must have been embarrassing," he said, his tone calm, almost conversational. The silence on the other end was brief, broken quickly by shouting. "Fix it now," his son demanded. "Restore the access." His wife cut in again, her voice high and cutting. "Do it now or else." He opened his eyes, stared at the blank monitor in front of him, his reflection faint in the glass. For what he asked, simply, "You told me I was too much, too needy. You didn't want me. So why would you want my money? The line went quiet for a heartbeat, then erupted with threats, his son's voice colder now, calculated. If you don't fix this, we'll take care of you when we get back. Care facilities. You can't handle this anymore. We'll sell your house to pay for it. He let the words hang in the air, their cruelty settling without reaction. When he spoke again, his voice was iron. I heard every word. His son pushed again, louder, demanding submission, demanding obedience, but his answer was simple, final, no. He pressed the phone flat against the desk, ending the call, the screen black once more. He sat back in the chair, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his heartbeat steady. The taste of defiance lingered, warm and unfamiliar, but welcome. He had always thought power belonged to those who shouted loudest, who demanded most, but now he knew better. Power was silence. Power was choice. Power was the ability to click once and rewrite the rules. He rose from the chair, walked slowly to the window, and looked out at the yard he had tended for decades. The grass glowed green in the late afternoon light, the fence still strong, the house standing steady behind him. His house, his deed, his life. They had spoken as if it were theirs to take, as if he were too weak to resist. But standing here now, he knew the truth. Everything they had was because of him. And now, everything they thought was secure balanced on his decision. The phone buzzed again on the desk, angry and insistent. But he ignored it. He walked back into the kitchen, poured himself another cup of coffee, and let the steam rise into his face. It tasted richer now, the bitterness grounding, the heat reminding him he was alive, present, unbroken. He carried the mug to the table, sat down, and let the calm spread through him. Across the ocean, they were unraveling, scrambling to explain a declined card, humiliated in front of the very people they had chosen over him. And here, in the quiet of his own home, he felt steady. He thought of the years behind him, the endless cycle of giving and sacrificing, of being thanked with words but not with love. He had been a shadow in their photos, a wallet in their pocket, a man mistaken for a resource. That era had ended with a click, and in the echo of that choice, he felt the stirrings of something sharper. This wasn't just about cutting them off. It was about reminding them of who he was. He leaned back, eyes drifting toward the study once more, where the deeds and papers waited like dormant weapons. His name was on every line, every title, every account that mattered. They had mistaken kindness for permission. They had mistaken silence for surrender. Now they would learn the difference. He sipped the coffee, the corners of his mouth lifting in something close to a smile, and set the mug down with deliberate care. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for their call, their approval, their validation. For the first time, he wasn't holding his breath to see if they needed him. He was breathing on his own, steady and sure, preparing for what came next. And what came next would not be another sacrifice. It would not be another check signed with hope. It would be action, deliberate and unforgettable. They had underestimated the man they left behind. And soon, they would learn that erasing him had consequences they had never imagined. The phone rang again, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet house like a blade. He stared at it for a long moment, letting it vibrate against the desk, his reflection flickering in the black glass. He could have ignored it, could have let the call slip into silence. But something in him insisted. He answered, pressing the phone to his ear, his hand steady this time. His son's voice exploded through the line, sharp and furious, laced with panic and entitlement. What did you do to the card? We were humiliated. The waiter had to come back 3 times. Fix it. Restore it now. The background clatter of silverware and muffled voices painted the scene Paris. A restaurant dripping with wealth, his son and daughter-in-law squirming while their facade cracked. He said nothing at first, letting the sound of their desperation fill his kitchen. Then, calm and deliberate, he replied, "I removed your access." A pause stretched, then snapped with his daughter-in-law's voice, shrill and commanding. "You can't do that. You owe us. Do it now." His son cut back in, harder, crueler. "If you don't, we'll deal with you when we return." His brows furrowed. His breath caught, but he forced his voice to remain flat. "Deal with me." The words that followed were knives. "You're old. You can't manage anymore. When we get back, we're looking into care facilities. You'll be safer there. And the house, we'll sell it. You don't need it." The line went quiet as those words lodged deep in his chest. Care facilities, sell your house. He gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles ached, the phone pressed tight to his ear. His heart beat thundering like a drum. They weren't just cutting him out of vacations. They were planning to erase him entirely, to strip him of the very walls that held his life. The cruelty wasn't hidden now, it was spoken plainly, as if his worth had already been reduced to a liability. His mouth was dry, his voice lower when he finally answered. "I heard every word." His son pressed harder, misreading the silence as weakness. "Restore the card. We'll talk about the rest later." His tone was cold, final. "No." The line erupted with fury. Demands, insults hurled across the ocean. He let it burn in his ear, then ended the call with a single touch. The silence afterward was deafening, but different. It wasn't empty this time. It was charged, alive with something new. He set the phone down face up on the table, the screen glowing with missed call alerts, the evidence of their cruelty preserved in numbers and timestamps. He sat very still, listening to the hum of his own house. The refrigerator clicked on. The clock ticked above the door. And outside, the neighbor's dog barked faintly. Ordinary life pressed around him, steady and unchanged, while inside everything had shifted. For the first time, he felt fear in its rawest form, not the anxious tremor of humiliation, but the cold awareness of what they were willing to do. They would put him away, box him up like an inconvenience, and strip him of the very home he had worked decades to protect. Fear gripped him, squeezed his chest, pressed sweat to his forehead. He let it live in him for a moment. Let it show him the abyss. Then, slowly, it began to change. Fear was fuel. He realized fear was a warning, but also a weapon. It could paralyze, or it could sharpen. And as he stared at the deeds laid across his desk, the ink of his name bold and unshakable, the fear drained into something else: determination. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't disposable. He was still the man who had built this life, still the man whose signature held the weight of power. If they wanted to erase him, they would have to reckon with what he was capable of when cornered. He stood, pushing the chair back with a sharp scrape against the floor, and walked into the study. The papers waited, the evidence of every sacrifice, every check written, every loan forgiven. His son and daughter-in-law thought these papers bound him, but they didn't realize they also bound them. His name was everywhere, written into the foundation of their lives. Without him, they had nothing, and now he knew it. He leaned over the desk, palms flat on the wood, his reflection hardening in the dark computer screen. They believed he was weak because he was old. They believed kindness meant surrender. They believed money was endless as long as he existed to provide it. But those beliefs were about to shatter. He straightened the stack of deeds with slow precision, the gesture calm but charged, as if aligning more than just paper. The phone buzzed again on the desk, their persistence clawing across the ocean, but he didn't touch it. Instead, he opened the drawer, pulled out the file that contained the deed to the house on Maple Street, the house they called theirs but had never transferred. His name stood alone at the top, unchallenged, undeniable. He traced it with one finger, his chest rising with a breath that steadied him. Fear had become clarity. Determination had taken root. He walked to the window, looking out over the yard. The lawn was trimmed, the shrubs even, the fence straight. 30 years of care had shaped this home, every nail and shingle paid for by his labor. And they thought they could sell it. They thought they could push him aside into some sterile room while strangers lived here. His jaw tightened. Over his dead body. He turned from the window, the study behind him humming with possibility. The house, the deeds, the accounts, they were his weapons now. And he would use them with precision. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They thought they were returning to control a man too weak to fight. What they didn't know was that they had awakened the part of him that had built, endured, and survived long before they were ever born. The phone stopped buzzing at last. The silence returning. But it wasn't silence anymore. It was resolve. He picked up the deed, held it firmly in his hand, and felt the weight of the paper, the weight of authority. He smiled faintly. Not with joy, but with certainty. They had delivered the threat. And he was ready with an answer. The game was no longer about humiliation. It was about survival. And survival had always been his strength. What he was about to do would not just protect him. It would teach them what it meant to underestimate the man they thought they could erase. The night after the call, he barely slept. But it wasn't the restless tossing of despair anymore. It was the quiet hum of calculation, the sharpened rhythm of a man who had finally remembered his own power. By dawn, his decision was set, every detail burning in his mind like a blueprint. He pulled the deed to the Maple Street house from his desk drawer and studied it again. The ink of his name standing firm, the only name that mattered. His son and daughter-in-law had built their lives inside those walls, believing possession meant ownership. But the truth was simple. Written in black and white, the house had always been his. The morning air was crisp when he drove through town. The familiar streets bathed in soft light. He pulled up outside a restored Victorian with a brass plaque that read, Chen Real Estate. Marcus Chen, a man he trusted, looked up from his desk with surprise. Gary, good to see you. How's retirement? I need to sell the Maple Street property, he said, his voice steady, stripped of hesitation. Quickly. Marcus hesitated for only a moment, reading the expression on his client's face. The house you bought for your son. Everything all right? Everything's fine, Gary replied, though his tone carried the weight of something unspoken. I just need it sold. Within an hour, the paperwork was signed, photos scheduled, the property listed. The market was hot. Marcus said, a house like that would move fast. Gary left the office lighter than he had entered. The first real weight lifted from his shoulders in years. Driving home, he tuned the radio to classical music, the strings swelling like a soundtrack to his quiet revolution. The next morning, he stood in the driveway of the Maple Street house as a moving truck pulled up. Dave, the owner of a small moving company, stepped out, his handshake firm, his tone straightforward. Family situation, Dave asked quietly. Something like that. Gary replied. The younger crew members began unloading dollies and boxes, and soon the house that had been filled with his son's life was being stripped piece by piece. The expensive sectional sofa, the leather dining set, the electronics, the wardrobes, all of it packed methodically, labeled, carried out under Gary's watchful eye. He helped where he could, lifting boxes, directing traffic, ignoring the ache in his back. Each item that left the house was like reclaiming a fragment of himself. He found photo albums tucked in the closet, flipping through them long enough to notice how often he was absent from the pictures. His son's wife's family filled every frame, their smiles wide, their presence dominating, while he appeared only at the edges, a shadow blurred into the background. He closed the album and handed it off to be boxed, his expression unreadable. By noon, the house was bare, the rooms echoing with emptiness. Sunlight streamed through uncovered windows, illuminating floors that had once held years of entitlement. Gary locked the door one final time, the keys jingling in his hand, and followed the moving truck to a secure storage facility. Unit 47B swallowed everything his son and daughter-in-law thought they owned. He paid for the first month up front, sliding cash across the counter with a sense of satisfaction that was both quiet and profound. Their lives were packed, stacked, and locked away, reduced to numbers on a padlock. The offer came faster than Marcus had promised. A young couple, bright-eyed and eager, made a cash bid well above his expectations. By Friday, the sale was closed. He met them at the house, shook their hands, and passed them the keys. Watching them walk through the front door with plans for the future, he felt something close to peace. The house no longer carried the weight of betrayal. It had been transformed into profit, into closure, into a victory he had carved from the wreckage. On Saturday, he returned one last time, parking across the street as a U-Haul sat in the driveway. The couple directed movers with smiles, their voices full of hope. A baby crib was carried inside, laughter spilling out into the air. He sat behind the wheel, his hands steady on the steering wheel, watching quietly. Then a taxi pulled up. The timing was perfect. His son and daughter-in-law stepped out, their luggage piled on the curb, their expressions shifting from exhaustion to confusion, then to horror. They froze, staring at the strangers moving into what they still believed was their home. His son stepped forward, anger rising. "Excuse me," he called, his voice sharp. "What are you doing in our house?" The young husband appeared at the doorway, holding paperwork, his tone calm. "Your house. We closed yesterday. This is ours now." His son's wife's face twisted, her voice cutting through the air. "That's impossible. This is our home." Gary chose that moment to step out of his car, walking slowly across the street, the envelope in his hand. His presence hit them harder than words. "Dad," his son snapped, fury in his voice. "What is going on?" He handed them the envelope. Inside was the storage unit contract, the number written clear and final. "Unit 47B, your things are safe," he said evenly. "First month's rent is covered." His son tore at the paper, his face red with disbelief. "You put our life in storage." His wife's voice cracked. "This is insane. You can't do this to family." "Family doesn't erase fathers from family vacations," Gary replied, his tone sharp as steel. The new owners stepped back inside, closing the door behind them, their laughter faint as it resumed inside the home that now belonged to them. His son's voice rose, shrill with desperation. "We'll fight this. We'll sue you. You'll regret this." Gary met his eyes without blinking. The sale was legal. The house was mine. They stood stranded on the sidewalk, their luggage at their feet, tourists in a world that no longer belonged to them. Gary turned, his boots striking the pavement with calm authority, and walked back to his car. He didn't look back as he opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and started the engine. Classical music rose once more, filling the silence with triumph. In the rear-view mirror, he saw his son shouting, his daughter-in-law clutching the crumpled envelope, their faces twisted with disbelief. He allowed himself the faintest smile, not of joy, but of justice. The power had shifted. The house was gone, their possessions locked away, their authority dismantled in a single stroke. For the first time in years, he drove away not as a man defeated, but as a man who had taken control. The betrayal had been answered, the balance restored. Yet as the road stretched ahead, he knew this was only one move in a larger game. The satisfaction was real, the justice undeniable. But the war was far from over. What came next would test not just their greed, but his resolve, and he was ready. The lawsuit came and went, like a storm he had already braced for. Papers were served, threats were hurled, Accusations drafted in cold legal language. He sat through it all with the patience of a man who had already won before the first gavel struck. The judge barely needed an hour. Property owner had the legal right to sell his own house. Case dismissed. Attorney fees to be covered by the plaintiffs. He signed the final documents with steady hands, placed them neatly in a folder labeled Legal Victory, and walked out of the courthouse with the kind of silence that carried more weight than triumphal shouting ever could. For the first time in years, the chains were gone. At the cafe across the street, townspeople whispered. Some said he had gone too far. Others muttered that blood was blood and should be forgiven. But most nodded quietly, the truth heavy in their voices. He had been taken for granted too long. He deserved better. He didn't answer any of them. He didn't need to. His steps carried him forward, not back. That afternoon, he wandered into a small pet store he had passed 100 times without stopping. Inside, a golden retriever with honey-colored fur and eyes full of quiet loyalty watched him from behind the glass. Max, the attendant said. 3 years old. Good with people. Loves car rides. His hand pressed against the glass, and Max leaned into it as if the connection had been waiting. Within an hour, the leash was in his hand, and Max sat beside him in the passenger seat, head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. For the first time in months, the car felt full. That night, Max curled up at the foot of his bed, the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing filling the room with a comfort no words could provide. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, not with the ache of betrayal this time, but with something gentler, something he hadn't felt in decades. Possibility. He thought about the years he had lost to obligations that were never repaid, the sacrifices that had turned to shackles, the quiet evenings wasted waiting for calls that never came. And now, with Max's warmth against his feet, he realized those years were gone, but not wasted. They had carved the man he was now, someone who could finally choose himself. The next morning, he brewed coffee with a clarity that made even the simple ritual feel new. The steam rose, curling in the sunlight, and he sat at the kitchen table flipping through a newspaper he barely read. His eyes drifted instead to the window, where the world stretched wide and waiting. He opened his laptop, typed best RVs for senior travel, and within hours he was walking through a dealership. Sunlight bouncing off polished aluminum and chrome. The salesman rattled through features, but Gary barely listened. He ran his hands along the smooth lines of a 25-foot Airstream, its silver frame gleaming like a promise. This one. The decision was simple. Like breathing. He traded in his second car, paid the balance outright, and drove it off the lot with Max already claiming the passenger seat as his throne. The days that followed were filled with a kind of preparation that felt like rebirth. He loaded camping gear, food supplies, Max's leash and bowls, and one single photo album, the only one he hadn't turned face down in his study. It held pictures of his son as a child, years before entitlement had replaced innocence. He packed it not out of longing, but out of respect for the version of life that had once been real. Everything else he left behind. He told no one his exact plans. He arranged for his mail to be held, asked a neighbor to keep an eye on the house, and stood for a long moment in the doorway, looking back at the rooms that had once echoed with bitterness. Now they stood silent, emptied of expectation, a place he could return to only if he wished. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the driver's seat of the RV. The road stretched ahead, the morning air crisp, the highway sign clear. Colorado, 500 miles. He shifted into gear, the engine humming beneath him, and Max barked once as if giving approval. Together they rolled forward, past the familiar corners of Davenport, past Maple Street where another family now planted flowers in the yard, past the memories that no longer had the power to hold him. By evening, the mountains rose before him, jagged against the sky, the setting sun painting the peaks in fire and gold. He pulled over at a scenic overlook, parked the RV, and set out a chair. Max settled at his feet, head resting on his paws, eyes watchful but calm. The wind carried the scent of pine, the distant cry of an eagle, the endless hum of freedom. He sat back, his hands resting lightly on the armrests, and let the silence settle not as emptiness but as fullness. For the first time in years, he was not defined by what he had given or what had been taken. He was not waiting for approval, not bracing for betrayal. He was simply alive, in this moment, with nothing pressing against him but the air of the open sky. He closed his eyes, the image of his son's furious face fading into memory, replaced by the horizon, the promise of roads still waiting. The betrayal had cut him deep, but it had also carved away everything unnecessary, leaving him sharper, freer, stronger. They had tried to discard him, to erase him, to box him into silence. Instead, they had pushed him toward a life they could never imagine, a life they would never control. The sun dipped lower, streaking the sky with shades of orange and violet. He reached down, scratching behind Max's ears, and whispered something that was more to himself than to the dog. "We're free now." Max wagged his tail, a steady rhythm against the ground, as if to agree. The night settled around them, stars pricking through the darkness, the Rockies standing tall like ancient witnesses. He leaned back in his chair, the hum of crickets filling the air, and felt peace settle into his bones. Tomorrow the road would take him somewhere new, another town, another horizon, another chance to live. And as he sat there beneath the vast American sky, he realized something he had never truly believed until now. His life was not over. It was beginning again. The road was his, the future wide open, and for the first time in decades, he belonged entirely to himself. Life often tests us in ways we never expect, and betrayal from family can cut deeper than anything else. Yet the story reminds us that age does not strip us of dignity, choices, or strength. Even when trust is broken, we are never powerless. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-respect is to draw boundaries, to take back control of what we have worked for all our lives, and to choose peace over continued sacrifice. For older adults, it is a powerful reminder that we still have the right to decide how we live, where we go, and who we let into our circle. Freedom isn't only found in youth, it can be rediscovered at any stage of life. Whether it's adopting a loyal companion, taking the road less traveled, or simply refusing to be erased, reclaiming independence is not just possible, it is necessary. The past may carry pain, but the future still belongs to us if we are brave enough to claim it. If this message speaks to you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that remind us it's never too late to take back our lives.